So welcome back. I had to move on to a second one because I'm only allowed to do 8 or 9 minutes on YouTube, and that's kind of what I'm using to post these lectures. So, and to get back to this, another important aspect of quality is the conditions under which nurses work. Now, this is what I got from Page, and I read a whole lot of other documents before I got to this one. And frankly, this one's pretty good. It's kind of a quick read, which makes it easier. And so, the fact is that there are about 2.5 million nurses practicing in the United States, and I got that from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the ANA supported it. This accounts for more than half of all healthcare workers and about a quarter of all hospital employees. And if you think about it, 3 out of 5 nurses work in hospitals. The remainder are kind of spread out among nursing homes, outpatient clinics, surgery centers, physicians' offices, schools, home care, you name it. The diversity of these workplaces means that nurses' working conditions can vary considerably. The AHRQ directed the Institute of Medicine to conduct research on nurses' working conditions back in 2002. They finished the process in 2004, and they made their recommendations. And what they looked at were hourly working schedules, overtime, which in many cases was mandatory, nurse fatigue, and nurse-patient ratios. They made multiple recommendations out of this. They found, first of all, 8 safeguards that all healthcare organizations should put in place, and you'll see those on table 1 of the Page paper. These safeguards are born of the overall IOM recommendations in the following domains. And I'm just going to briefly go through these domains. These include transformational leadership and evidence-based management. This focuses on improving nursing's visibility to organizational and clinical managers, particularly as it affects workflow, patient safety, and ongoing change. What I mean by this is that this recommendation says that nurses don't have enough of a voice in how healthcare is done in hospitals, and nurses need more of a voice. They should be involved in these monitoring of such things as workflow, as patient safety, as how to manage change in the organization. So including the nurse in whether or not they incorporate a certain change to the electronic health record, whether they incorporate a certain change to the architecture of a unit. For instance, at the University of Maryland Hospital, several years ago, they had put out a call to several nurses, and I'm not sure if it went out to every nurse, frankly, but I got one of them, that was asking questions about how should they change the shape of the intensive care units so that it's more nurse-friendly. And this information was incorporated into the architecture and the design of the final outcome of the intensive care units, particularly those over in shock trauma. So I don't think it was I think it was shock trauma. Anyway, but that is an important part of this transformational leadership and evidence-based management recommendation. The next recommendation is maximizing workflow capability, which focuses on efficient, effective, and safe staffing levels, and improving collaborative enterprises among healthcare providers in a way that maximizes patient care and safety while minimizing inefficiencies that could lead to fatigue, ineffective practice patterns, and increased costs. What this means is that the workforce, the nursing workforce, should be used in a way that's efficient, not having too many but not having too few nurses, effective, making sure that the nurses that are in a certain area can do that work, and you're not pulling nurses from areas that they're just not going to be comfortable where they're going. And safe staffing levels, you have the right number of patients for the right number of nurses, not overwhelming the nurse, but not also causing too much cost. So these plus improving collaborative enterprise. What I mean by improving collaborative enterprise is really having a better communication among the different professions within the healthcare system, such that physicians, nurses, radiology technicians, occupational therapists all communicate effectively about patient care needs, patient safety needs, and etc., without any one organization or one group being more important than the others. Design of work and workspace to prevent and mitigate errors is another area that focuses on restricting work schedules, standardizing efficient workloads, and limiting nurses' responsibilities to those requiring the nurse's skills. Now, the previous recommendation and this recommendation have a lot of crossover, but ultimately this one focuses on looking at the work schedules so that nurses aren't working more than 60 hours a week. Workloads so that nurses aren't required to carry way too many patients, and responsibilities so that nurses aren't required to do things like go get the linen cart, when it really doesn't require a nurse to get a linen cart. The next recommendation is creating and sustaining a culture of safety. Now, this focuses on assessing the existing culture of safety, incorporating a systematic as opposed to individual blame approach to safety and error prevention, and consulting with experts to improve safety processes. Right now, as I mentioned in the previous part of this lecture, nurses, everybody really, if you make a mistake, it's a bad thing. Now, even if the mistake isn't really your fault, you grabbed something that was dark green because you were told to get the green top tube, and in fact, they meant the light green top tube. These are systematic errors, so really changing the focus so that systematic errors are pulled out and corrected, and blame is taken away from the individual, unless there's individual blame that needs to be shared. Finally, there were recommendations that were part of this that looked at whether Congress should pass legislation to force some of these changes to take place, and frankly that legislation became part of the Patient Safety and Quality Improvement Act of 2005. Then finally the organization, the IOM, came out with research implications, and those suggested multiple studies to describe nursing work generally, work related to nursing errors, efficiency, standards, staffing, and other aspects of patient safety. So they recommended, hey, let's put some money out there and do some research. Now, these recommendations, all of them are really specific to a hospital, the ones that came out of the IOM, but they translate readily to other areas of nursing work. So, for instance, effective nursing leadership is effective nursing leadership, whether it's at a nursing home, a clinic, or a hospital. And management, having nurses represent their needs to management can improve any area of practice. It would be equally easy to identify other non-hospital examples for any of the other recommendations. Now, this report contributes to patient safety in 3 ways, according to Page. First, it focuses necessary attention on the influence of nurses and their work environments on safety. Second, it emphasizes the influence that organizational and clinical leadership has on practice, work environment, and patient safety. And third, it takes a systematic view and generalized view of how the workplace affects safety. So it really looks at the architecture and the culture as well. So many of these recommendations have been promulgated in this class, have found their way to legislation already. They've also found their way to accreditation and professional practice. And one of the goals that we have in reviewing this here is that this information allows us to identify the gaps between what was recommended and what's been done, so that we can see what's really still needed. Additionally, practitioners in quality management need to carefully assess these recommendations and the subsequent changes in order to identify and mitigate any of their unintended consequences. So that's it. I will talk to you next week.